Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 179 of the Citrix Session. I'm your host for today, Bill Sutton, the Director of Modern Workspace at XenTegra. We got just a couple of us today on the call. Accompanying me is Todd Smith from Citrix. Todd, do you want to say hello to everyone and just update us on what's been going on in your world? It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been a while. Thanks for having me here today, Bill. It's been a little while since we all were together.
Yep.
Um, Looking forward to today's topic, though.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, it has obviously been a while. I know that we've just all been really busy, and I was on PTO last week, so hopefully we'll kick this back in and like we were saying before we started the recording, going to try to see if we can't hit the 200 mark before the end of the year. So there should be enough weeks left in the year, but it's going to depend on content and how busy we get. So we'll see. So the topic for today is a blog article, like usual, from May the 5th. It's entitled "Rising Costs, Aging Hardware, One Smart Solution." This is a Citrix blog written by Philip Benkler, about, like I said, back on May 5th. So really what it's covering here is the concept of the new tariffs that we're all becoming more and more familiar with if you follow the news. Tariffs that are being imposed to help for whatever reason. We won't get into the politics, right? Right, Todd. Keep that out of this.
I'm hoping not because I've got
Yeah.
both Canadian politics and U.S. politics in my territory. So
Little button of the heads going on there, right? A little bit
there
maybe.
is.
So yeah. So, I mean, the bottom line is tariffs or not, we are generally seeing hardware prices being pushed upwards,
Yeah.
somewhat uncharted, and I don't think that's going away. Whether obviously tariffs do have an impact on that, but even if they're not there, I think we're still going to see them go up. Another key element to this is the transition from Windows 10 to Windows 11, which is not as simple as it used to be, where you just, pop in your ISO or mount your ISO and then run the installer. There are some key considerations that customers must make before doing that upgrade, and this lends itself towards the kind of the two big things we're going to talk about today. Todd, you want to introduce anything here and comment on what I've said thus far?
Yeah. So this is kind of a very interesting topic because so Philip came over to Citrix through the Unicon acquisition, where he
Oh,
was basically
okay.
the product leader over there. Um, and it's a very interesting purchase at the time, because we really weren't in the hardware business or the endpoint business. I mean, we had
Right.
dabbled a little bit in there. If you remember the Raspberry Pi devices, and we had an X1 mouse for a little while, we kind of gravitated away from Citrix being really kind of focused on endpoints. But now with the addition of Unicon and the two core products being Scout, which is the management utility, and then Elux, which is the actual hardened operating system that goes on the endpoint, it really puts us in an interesting position to be able to talk to customers about repurposing their old hardware or older hardware and connect into a VDI or DAS session that's running inside the data center that is fully capable of running a Windows 11 operating system and presenting that Windows 11 through the form of a virtual desktop connection to that user on that secured endpoint. Um, it's interesting about the Windows 11 migration. Everyone, Microsoft has the tool that allows you to check and see if your machine is Windows 11 compatible, and it's really not looking at the hardware of the machine; it's looking at the configuration of the machine. So if you have a machine that has TPM capabilities, but it happens to be turned off in the BIOS, it's going to fail that hardware check. And really the critical thing is you want to be able to make sure that your machine or your physical endpoint is capable of running Windows 11 before you do that migration. Um, the other piece of it is that there's organizations that have a large fleet of desktops and endpoints. The cost associated with it and the manpower it's going to take to migrate all of those physical devices over to new hardware is going to be pretty incredible. And then on top of that, you add in the tariffs.
Right. Yeah, it all kind of comes together at one time, and really, with when you look at the cost, not just of the what the tariffs are imposing, but other elements that play into that, like you said, certainly it makes sense to look at something like Elux.
Yep.
Um, Obviously, one of the options, customers in this instance are often facing tough choices, whether they delay upgrades or absorb the costs, or even, worse yet, would be reduce headcount. We don't want
Yep.
to see that. Or pivot, which is what we're talking about today. And
Yep.
and certainly Citrix is in this conversation largely because of the capabilities of virtualizing desktops, but also, as Todd alluded to there a minute ago, the fact that they're now offering a secure OS that has the capability of being able to transform existing devices and then enable their connectivity back to a Citrix DAS environment or virtual desktops, virtual apps and desktops, CDAD. So you don't have to necessarily rip and replace your hardware to enable access to Windows 11. You can leverage Elux and their Scout management utility. So there's a number of ways in the article that they mentioned, four different ways or four different elements in terms of how it works. Boot to VDI, which is essentially where you turn the device on and it boots right into your Citrix environment and you log in directly. So you're not logging in one time and then clicking an icon. You're turning it on. You can structure it that way, but if you have the same desktops, right, Todd, you just turn
Yep.
it on, you get a log authentication prompt, you enter the credentials, and you're at your desktop, right?
Yeah. So, and Bill, this is kind of the extending out the conversation that we've had for almost 20 years about these kiosk type machines where
Yeah,
you
yeah,
have a kiosk in the hallway of a hospital and you walk up to it, you enter your credentials and it brings you directly into your application, your desktop, your VDI session.
right, right. Yeah, and kind of along those lines, I know that Elux or Unicon, now Citrix, whatever it ends up being called, is working very closely with some of the vendors that enable that tap and go, like Imprivata.
Yep.
So
Yep.
the ability to, in a healthcare setting, to your point, literally walking up to the device and tapping in, entering a PIN potentially, and then boom, you're right in your desktop. So certainly
Yep.
that's supported, and Elux is capable of that.
Yep.
Obviously, the Elux operating system is generally hardware agnostic. Anything x86. So as long as
Correct.
you're x86, you'll work natively. This Whether you're talking about an existing, relatively new PC or even older devices, have the capability of running it, so customers can avoid having to purchase new hardware to get this capability enabled in their environment.
Yeah, and I think the
Um,
critical thing there, Bill, is I know we're covering this on one of the next bullet points is
yeah,
around buying new hardware right now with the tariffs is really going to have some complications into it, both from a pricing perspective as well as an availability perspective. So
yes,
if we can, even if we can help customers buy some time on their calendar to make the hardware refresh decision, right?
yeah,
We still feel that's got immense value for the customer.
absolutely. And then, of course, the operating system that Elux leverages is a basically a hardened Linux operating type system. So it doesn't have the attack surface that something like a traditional Windows might have, particularly if it's not patched or secured. So it and then the Elux, like I think we talked about it on an earlier blog post or earlier podcast rather, regarding the management framework Scout, which is a web-based
Mhm.
management framework that can deploy policies and lock down and secure these devices. Right, Todd.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And between the management consoles, the integration with
Yeah.
being able to repurpose and reuse those x86 platform endpoints, and then also the inclusion of the work that we're doing. There's another blog post out there that was recently put out around our integration with Imprivata to provide that tap and
Hmm.
go functionality, um, which was really critical in a lot of healthcare scenarios where tap and go is really the only way to authenticate for a lot of the end users.
Absolutely. And then you want to talk briefly, Todd, of your knowledge of the provisioning process or the deployment process, kind of the last bullet there.
Yeah, so it's a pretty simple and straightforward deployment process, if you're familiar with the way we deploy provisioning services or machine creation services, or even our application layering and application packaging process, it's very similar. You build
Yeah.
an image, which oftentimes requires you to, if you're an existing consumer of this, you take an image and you merely make a copy of it and update, provide all your updates, apply all your patches, apply all your application changes and things like that. And then you basically add that to your catalog. And then upon reboot, the machine will pick up the most recent uh, version of that image to basically download and install.
Right.
The other piece of it is that you can push out to new devices, as well as traditional deployment key capabilities with things like USB keys or connecting them to a URL to do that initial download. But really, the Scout platform, the Scout tool, really kind of gives us the ability to provide single pane of glass or single console management for this.
Yeah. So user gets a device in the mail or has an existing device, they just boot it a certain way or connect it
Yep,
in some manner. It
correct.
does a boot phone's home, so to speak.
Yep,
Scout pushes down the image.
yep.
It installs the image, reboots again. The Scout pushes out
And
whatever policies are needed for connectivity back to the mothership, and then you're on your merry way for the most part, right?
yeah, and because it's a Linux-based operating system and it's a hardened Linux-based, you're not pushing the entire installation bits down there. You're
Right,
pushing basically the bin file, right, to get it
right.
down to that endpoint so it can actually be booted into that image. Um, there's not an awful lot of applications that get built into that image. It's pretty much a connector.
Right.
Think of it as the Workspace app gets built directly into there. It provides
Hmm.
the authentication tool. It allows you to sign in, and whether you're using a virtual app or virtual desktop or a VDI session or a DAS session, it's all it basically makes it a much more streamlined user experience, but also an administrative experience. And you're not pushing a lot of data bits across the wire. That was the
Yeah.
huge challenge that a lot of organizations had. I mean, if you remember back in the day with ghosting machines, where
Oh yeah.
you would literally see the pig going through the anaconda on the network perspective. Very long time to boot and get the image installed on that endpoint. There's no installation really on that endpoint.
Right. Right. Yeah, I remember those ghost days very well. I was recently telling my son about what I did when I got started in this business, and it was ghosting drives in white box machines. So I remember those days well.
And if we go even further, Bill, remember having to put diskettes in,
Oh yeah, oh
the
yeah.
100 diskettes that were required to boot up a Windows Server OS.
Windows Server OS, exactly, exactly. So any other comments on Elux basically at this point or Scout, Todd?
Yeah. So really, if it's one of those tools that and capabilities that are included in your universal hybrid multi-cloud as well as Citrix platform licenses. The benefit here is really making sure that the customers have the option to still leverage the Citrix applications and desktops without having to go and replace their entire fleet of endpoints.
Right. And along the same lines, I'm glad you said that. I was gonna do that. You took the words right out of my mouth when it comes to how do our customers get this,
Yep.
get Elux, and it's universal hybrid multi-cloud licensing or the Citrix platform license. They get the entitlement
Yep.
to the software. And along those same lines, when it comes to infrastructure, networking infrastructure hardware, Citrix offers something else that we're all familiar with that is also included in both the universal UHMC or universal hybrid multi-cloud license and the platform license. And that's the NetScaler software, right, Todd?
Yep, that's absolutely right. The NetScaler entitlement is included in both of those. And because we've shifted over from being a hardware only solution when it came to NetScaler, we've had virtual NetScaler appliances for some time now,
Yes.
almost 10 years now. And what that basically says is that you don't have to have it running on physical hardware. You can actually run it as a virtual machine, which once again, if hardware is being tariffed, or we've got supply chain issues with the hardware that's out there, that's not going to prevent you from running a NetScaler to do the application delivery controller, the load balancing capabilities, the application firewall capabilities, the VPN replacement capabilities as well. You can all run that on virtual machine or basically a hypervisor of your choice. The
Right.
benefit there is you can get it up and running while you're waiting on hardware to arrive.
Yeah, we've had a few projects over the course of the past month or two that where customers had legacy NetScaler hardware and they were UHMC, and they decided they didn't want the hardware anymore, wanted to go virtual. All
Yep.
they had to do was stand up some VPXs, sometimes more than one, many times more than two. You'd always want at least two, as a way of kind of future proofing themselves, if you will, from a hardware perspective by leveraging the hypervisor as the resident for the VPX instances. So this is another benefit of, they don't have to worry about buying new hardware and paying the tariff or the additional cost, and can leverage their existing hypervisor investment to be used for future proofing them and allowing them to run these things as virtual machines.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the other thing to kind of bring into the conversation is, and it's certainly not as it's not as critical, or it could be as critical as the tariff conversation, is really the supply chain, the global supply chain challenges with getting chips shipped around the world, and kind of the delays that are caused by a variety of different reasons. Um, I think there's a lot of customers that are starting to bake into their purchasing, a 6 to 8 week delivery cycle for physical hardware appliances that's out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're at the end of the article, so it's a pretty quick one today, Todd.
Yeah.
Which we kind of knew going into it, but at the end of the day, what I would say to our listeners is, if this is something of interest to you and you're coming up for renewal, let's get you on UHMC. If you're on a legacy license SKU, and get you access to this goodness. And obviously with Citrix and XenTegra, we can help guide you on this and get a POC or a POV put in place, and ultimately get this scaled out for you. So these are great solutions that really are part of the family of products that Citrix is now packaging. So just make sure that you reach out to us if you need anything or need any assistance with these capabilities. Any final thoughts, Todd?
Yeah, Bill, I think the real kind of critical piece here is, continuing to add value without
Yeah.
increasing the overall costs, right? So, it used to be, we buy something and you'd have to go out and purchase it separately through your Citrix partner or your Citrix sales reps. We're now adding a lot of these capabilities directly into the product suite and into the licensing model that a lot of customers already have, or that they're moving to, without having to go down the path of making additional procurement purchases to do that. The other piece of it is really, we feel that it's giving customers a lot more flexibility and agility in these uncertain markets that are out there right now, where it may be a hardware acquisition problem. It could be a forced update that's coming down the road for the endpoints. It could be a variety of different things. We're creating solutions across the board to help customers solve these business problems that are out there.
Absolutely. Yeah. One thing that we don't always talk about here or bring up is when you start talking about the Windows 11 conversation. What I think a lot of customers don't realize is you can leverage Windows 365 through the Citrix environment. And in fact, I use it every day.
Yeah.
And I'm using it right now for this podcast, as I'm doing this through a Windows 365 desktop that is brokered through HDX. So I'm getting all of the HDX capabilities. I'm not doing it on an Elux device yet. I'm running it from a standard Windows laptop, but Elux is on the list for me to get that in place. And The point of bringing that up is there's a number of ways to get to Windows 11. You can have it obviously have an on-prem data center, like you might have historically, and build a virtual machine, an image, run it through MCS or PVS, and get it delivered via Elux to your end users. You can run it in the cloud, leveraging the same control plane, and you can run Win365 leveraging the same control plane. So there's a lot of capabilities that Citrix offers within the family of the items in each package that really add value, like you said, Todd, to the overall product and the overall solution.
Yeah, and I think this is also critical, Bill, where you're basically walking us all through the hybrid messaging, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter where the workloads are being run. It doesn't matter how you get there. It needs to be secure, reliable, and efficient.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Todd, any final thoughts?
No, just we're one step closer to episode 200, Bill.
That's right. We're getting pretty close. So we'll make that a goal by the end of the year to get to episode 200. Might be December, but we'll try to get there. So
what a way to ring in the new year.
Yeah, exactly. As always, Todd, thank you so much for your participation and all of your good knowledge on this podcast. And we'll see everyone next week, hopefully.
Great. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.